My name is, Mark Burr. I'm with Professional Services at AWS. I've been here for about closing in on 5 years at this point. I run a team called Technology Solutions and Delivery, and our goal is primarily to take the types of things that we do in professional services repeatedly and attempt to package them up and scale them across multiple teams to make these sort of foundational things that we do cheaper, faster, and more scalable. And I'm joined today by Randy Domingo, who's also on my team.
Hey everyone, my name is Randy Domingo. I'm principal engineer on our public sector professional services. Yeah, excited to talk to you about what we've been up to.
So I'll spend the first 20 minutes or so sort of giving the background, how we got here, why we're doing what we're doing. And it all starts here. As you can see, our product is called the Landing Zone Accelerator on AWS. We'll talk a little bit more about that soon. I'm going to look at this through the lens of compliance, because compliance is a sort of organizing framework for security and a lot of the automation that our customers are trying to build at scale. In the public sector, and where I started was in the federal civilian and US Department of Defense space. Most of those customers are building across multiple regions, commercial, gov cloud, and in some cases even the dedicated cloud regions are classified regions. So AWS provides an enormous array of services, features, capabilities that we represent through our shared responsibility model. And a lot of those you inherit right out of the box. We have attestations, we do repeated accreditations against the platform, and then there are multiple controls that are expressed through the API or the programming interfaces. You don't get all of that functionality that you will need to run full-scale enterprise workloads right out of the box. It takes a while to build up that automation, and we do that in professional services. We do it through solutions, we do it through our partners, and there's a sort of wide variety of capability out there and varying amounts of time it takes to build all of that up. So when you look at compliance through like a risk management framework like NIST 853 Rev 4, most of the families you see are represented. The easy ones to understand, of course, are things like the physical controls. Data center, we provide you those data centers. Virtualization, we provide you those service layers to do all of that work. Then things get a little more nuanced as you climb into other families. You'll inherit several of those from AWS directly, but then you're going to have to decide how you want to do the remaining, say, 35 to 40% of those controls. That can take a surprisingly long period of time with many large customers. So the goal in all of this is not even just to build these compliant environments. The goal is to take full advantage of the cloud. It's to see all of those next generation workloads, all of those migrated workloads up and running so that you see improved costs, improved operational resilience. The list goes on. But it's very easy to get mired in the foundational building. So we make a huge array of security services and compliance services available. And most of these are built on top of or extend Control Tower, the core offering for building out landing zones. But you'll often see organizations being leveraged, and Macie and Security Hub, GuardDuty. Most of these you can flip on with a single click of a button. But if you're running, say, dozens of accounts, hundreds of accounts, even thousands of accounts, or you're running them across multiple regions, or what we sometimes call partitions in AWS, you'll see that not only do you have some challenges with that scale or implementing it, and it's not to say it can't be done, and there are many, many mechanisms for doing this, but sometimes there are too many mechanisms. And what works, say, in some commercial regions doesn't necessarily work in all commercial regions. You step into GovCloud and you're dealing with yet another snowflake in some ways, and then you climb into the dedicated cloud regions like secret and top secret. You may have to have 4 or 5 operational models that represent all of those. So what we look to do in all of this is to basically figure out a way to scale this. We're asked to do this very commonly in professional services. When we work with our partners as well, we go into customer environments, and these builds can take sometimes months. It can sometimes even take years, depending on how large that entire scale is. So if you expand this out across the entire family of security and compliance capabilities, you have quite a bit of work to do at this scale of orchestration. And pretty much all of these are what we typically describe in AWS as platform level controls. And the reason why is because you're going to have them in almost every account that you're going to be running at enterprise scale. You're going to be doing things all the way from building out your identity model. It's one of the very first things we do when we work with you in professional services. It's one of the very first things you need to do inside of AWS to make sort of any capability happen when you need access through identities you're maybe getting from an external source, and you're bringing into AWS and you're expressing them through policies. They give you access to the internal resources. How you decide to build those policies, how you decide to scale those policies can have impacts on how that sort of automation will scale as you grow organizationally. And the idea of putting this up here is not to frighten you in any way with that complexity. It's just to show you that if you don't build the right foundation up front and scale accordingly, you're going to run into unexpected roadblocks down the line. So a very popular topic in AWS right now is the subject of resilience. And resilience is an incredibly important thing in the workloads, but also down to your foundational platform. You want to build out your multi-account environment. You want to organize your controls so that when you push a change, you're pushing it across hundreds or thousands of accounts, and to have it happen within a reasonable period of time and completely reliably. You want to secure that environment, but you also want to do it in a way that you're not having to rebuild at certain times when you realize you've hit scaling factors that you didn't account for. And then the sustainability over time. Sustainability in this case means if you made an investment a year ago, you want that investment to still stand true today. You want to be able to reuse the same automation that you've put in place. This can get very complicated if we work with, say, federal customers or government customers or the Department of Defense that may have had generations of partners, generations of leadership, generations of investment, and they're carrying around multiple forms of technical debt. And in doing so and addressing that, you may have an entire engagement that has to go back and address that foundational building that should have been done correctly in the first place. So AWS likes to express its expertise in a variety of ways, and we do it well. We do it very well. We have well-architected, which I'm sure many of you have either been a part of or have done yourselves. There are many perspectives and many pillars inside of well-architected that give a lot of leadership all the way down to the foundational levels. But again, it doesn't say necessarily how you implement those things. It's an assessment of the efficiency of how you've chosen and what you've decided to build. Sustainable architectures over time. You want things that are highly repeatable, so you could look at this as immutable architectures. You could look at things that take full advantage of cloud-native capabilities inside your environments. Also, our Architecture Center, if you've ever seen this or dived into it, there are a myriad of examples of how to do things well. But again, it doesn't necessarily show you how do you build or automate it at scale. You will see a lot of that in things that come out of AWS Solutions, which is where we fall into for the most part. However, I will say that well-architected, the sustainable architecture approach, Architecture Center, many aspects of these are represented in the solution we're talking about today. So the goal with all of this at the end of the day, and I said it at the beginning, we're talking foundationally about landing zones. Now, just out of curiosity, there are a lot of people in the room right now, and I think I can see most of you. How many of you have landing zones right now in your environments? I'd say that's about a third of the room. How many of you are planning to build one in the next year? It's about the same amount. How many of you are happy with the landing zone that you built in the first place? One person. Two people. You guys don't count. You used to be AWS. So, what is a landing zone at the end of the day? Foundationally, a landing zone is a multi-account architecture. All the associated orchestration and automation that brings that landing zone together. And the idea of it, and the reason why we call it a landing zone, the concept's been around for about 7 or 8 years. The idea is that we take workloads out of your environment, and in the before time, when we were lifting and shifting applications out of your environment, we needed a place to land them. We're lifting them up and we're dropping them into an environment. And the benefit of the environment is that in addition to just using an AWS account and those foundational capabilities, you start to separate out duties. The Department of Defense in the United States observed this early on. Separation of duties, security, logging, blast radius control is a very common term you hear used. But the same idea also came out of global financial services in many of these customers. These are customers that have pushed the AWS platform to enormous scale. And the idea of this orchestration of the account paradigm inside of AWS was ultimately expressed as a service called Control Tower. And Control Tower is an amazing service. We have a very close relationship with that team. We've built on it quite a bit. But one of the limitations of Control Tower, it's not available everywhere yet. It is growing over time, but also, as with every AWS service, I often describe this as the difference between what your services can do in aggregate, in orchestration, and then where the customer is asking you to be. That difference in that capability requires some effort to build up over time, and that's why professional services exists. It's why we have robust partners and a huge partner network. But the point is, you should have an environment that scales as you are scaling. You should have environmental level controls so that you don't have to rebuild them at the workload level. And more importantly, as you're working across the paradigm of, say, GovCloud, and maybe even in the classified regions, you want the same framework again and again. I myself, in professional services, have observed changes over time in the way we have addressed this. But I've worked with a lot of partners too. I've worked in a lot of customer environments that had uniquely, organically homegrown solutions. And one of the things that we've addressed, and I'm very fortunate to have a team that is composed of some very tenured Amazonians. We've been building this stuff in the public sector and with large enterprise customers for a very long time. The goal we set out, and we're very deliberate about this. Historically, you may have heard something called the compliant framework. The compliant framework for US federal and DoD workloads. It was something that came out in December 2020. It was essentially a GovCloud landing zone framework. The reason why we built it is it came out of a heritage in the Department of Defense, something called the SCCA, the Secure Cloud Computing Architecture. And we found ourselves building this again and again and again in professional services to the point where Randy and a few others on the DoD team and I originally were a part of, why don't we just build this into a common framework? And the goal with AWS Professional Services, just like AWS itself, we want to take things that we've built over time and get it out of something the customer needs to pay for directly and move it into something that can be open sourced and used at scale across our partners and also in professional services, but reduce the amount of time and money it takes to build these things out. We were asked to extend that paradigm over time and expand it into other regions. As you may know, there are many solutions that float around that address this idea. These solutions frameworks or automation frameworks that build out landing zone environments, build out capabilities in various regions and geographies around the world. But our goal is to work very closely with the Control Tower service and expand as it expands over time. And in areas where it is not available, we will be available and will give you a smooth path to onboarding into Control Tower when we get there. So that's the basic driver for why we do this. The goal, at the end of the day, in all of those frameworks, everything I've talked about, everything we built before, everything that's available as a service, you want to build your security and compliance in code. You want it baked into your environment. You want it sitting there waiting for your workloads to inherit as you scale. And what you build for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 accounts, you want to work for 10, you want it to work for 100, you want it to work for 1,000 or thousands of accounts. And that's the scalability. And the resilience over time is it's going to change. Your environment's going to change, your needs are going to change, you're going to have to add additional controls, additional capabilities. You want those same repeatable mechanisms to do all that work for you without having to re-engineer an entirely new system at scale. So this is why we built, fundamentally, Landing Zone Accelerator on AWS. It is so called because, fundamentally, it builds a landing zone. We want to accelerate this process. We want to take customers that have limited operational budgets and not waste it all building foundationally. That stuff should go fast. It should go highly repeatably. It should go scalably. And then we get to the value-added reasons why you're moving to cloud. You want to move those next generation workloads. You want to liquidate your data centers. I've been on engagements before, and this is not uncommon. It's in the industry where a customer will spend a year, 18 months or more building out their foundational environments. And these complexities come through things like ATOs, authority to operate. That's proving your compliance and against your security controls, but also challenges with scaling the foundational automation that was used to build it out in the first place. Some of those customers have no automation. They've clicked through the console to get there, and then they layer on automation after the fact, and it doesn't necessarily scale along with their growth pattern. So what do you get out of it? And this is I'll just walk you through this left to right. Flexibility is key for us. We want to work in every region. We want to work with every AWS service. And we've basically automated all of that for you out of the box. It's all built into the framework. We are essentially leveraging our expertise building on AWS, automating things like Control Tower, automating beyond Control Tower, automating things like config and Security Hub and Guard Duty and all of it. And we're leveraging a next generation framework that Randy will talk in more detail about, CDK. It's the Cloud Development Kit. But we did one thing fundamentally different that we haven't really done in the past. And that is, you see this line about customer resources focus on learning to operate in the cloud. That also means that we don't want to build out an environment that the customer is shocked with in their first 3 months or 6 months. Building out the necessary expertise to run these environments can take time. Transformation across your organization can take time. Training your organization can take time. And what we've done is separated out the code engine that builds all those controls from the configuration. Why is that important? Because it means that relatively cloud unskilled personnel can operate all of this automation without having to know any programming code whatsoever. So all of the text files, or YAML files, have basic simple lines that say, this is the networking range I want. This is the DNS I want. This is the account style I want. These are the security controls I want. You press play, the automation engine runs, and it spits out all of the automation that you would have to spend time building. And I mean thousands of files of infrastructure as code. So that was a very, very key element of building out and scaling this approach. So what we found in our early tests, and we've had beta customers we've been running this with, and other tests that we run internally, what can often take months, we have reduced to days. And the benefit that comes out of that, of course, is you can have fully operational, fully configured environments in a matter of hours if you know which of those decisions you want to make up front. But what we get next out of it is a mechanism for scaling that to however many accounts you can handle, up to the limits of the services, of course. And we're open sourcing the whole thing. So we open sourced it yesterday. It's sitting in GitHub. You can look it up on AWS Solutions, and you'll see at the end of the talk, there will be a few QR codes, which will allow you to look these things up. And of course, these slides will be available in the talk later. The reason why we do that is there is an entire development team behind this effort. So we want all of our professional services efforts to center around this approach. so that we have a standardized mechanism that we come into your environments with. We're working with several partners, getting them trained up on this approach as well. We're working with ISVs and technology partners, giving them plugins into the environment. And I can't name any of those names at the moment, but they're big names and you use them fairly regularly. And the benefit out of this is that as new capabilities become available on the platform, we're going to roll out very fast updates into GitHub. Now, some of you might go, well, how often do I have to update this thing? This seems a little scary. It's not. Because we've separated out the configuration and the code, it means that you don't have to modify any of that programming code. And because of it, we can upgrade your engine in your environment. You pull it right out of GitHub, run it through your security scanners or whatever your accreditation process is, and you can deploy that change in your environment without breaking any of those controls. And this is a fairly big deal. It extends to a lot of other capabilities on the platform, but it also has an alternative benefit that may not be immediately obvious. AWS wants, and we have learned in professional services what our customers want. They always ask us, don't you have a service that does this? Can't you just do this for me? And all of the services go through their own progression of maturity. And as these services mature and add additional capabilities, and move the functionality that we've automated beyond the services, those get absorbed in to the services, and we just update the engine to take advantage of their API instead of the implementation we've done on top of it. And that means the solution becomes lighter weight over time, and it also means that you get the benefit of running those things faster and cheaply inside of managed services. So that's the two-way door innovation approach of open sourcing and doing this development model. But the foundational reason we do this is to build very fast, secure, highly compliant environments very rapidly and allow you to iterate very rapidly. We also, and we don't have too much time to talk about it today, there will be other talks and you'll see some blogs coming out about this. We're working on building accreditation packages as well, which means if you're a NIST compliant environment or a HIPAA compliant environment, we will have pre-authored evidence packages that you can use for your ATO process to speed up the entire effort. And the benefit of that, of course, is to not only allow you to build those compliant and secure environments, but also to get them rapidly accredited after the fact with AWS's support, and this would all be available through open source. So now I'm going to turn it over to Randy to talk a little more deeply about the solution itself.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm going to dive deeper into the architecture. We talk about scalability. How do we do this to be able to go cover tens of accounts, hundreds of accounts, right? The many regions that you might want to have your multi-account environment configured in. So at a high level, and we're going to dive deeper into an example of an environment that can be built out with the Landing Zone Accelerator. But at a high level, again, like Mark was saying, we've separated out the configuration from the actual deployment engine itself. So you see that represented here, a set of configuration files. We have about 6 configuration files to break out the individual portions. So when we're talking about networking, your IAM users and groups, security services that you want to use, they're in distinct packages to be able to go in and just have smaller sets to be able to go make those configuration changes. So we use the Cloud Development Kit, and for those that are familiar with it, it is a higher level language mechanism to be able to do infrastructure as code development. So we use TypeScript specifically for it, and that allows us to be able to use that binary essentially to go ingest our configuration files and output CloudFormation stacks. And we are using the CDK engine to be able to do the CloudFormation deployment. And ultimately, that will go in and execute across the different accounts, across the different regions, and source that information from our public GitHub project. So diving a little bit deeper, how do you install this? So similar to Many of our other AWS solutions, we all start with a bootstrap template or installation template to be able to go lay down the initial parts of the solution. And in our case, it's going to set up a code commit repository that's going to store your configuration files. We use code commit specifically because it is a Git repository, so it's an easy way to meet some of your configuration management controls. You have a history of all the changes that are in there, and you can implement a process, a human process, to be able to go do some of the reviews on there and move that forward. That then feeds into an AWS code pipeline. And in that code pipeline, we are also using code build to ultimately execute our CDK project. And specifically, why did we choose CDK? CDK allows us to be able to do parallel deployments massively at scale across multiple accounts and multiple regions. So if you dive into the code base, and we'll put up the links here in a bit, but you'll see that there's a parallelization engine in there where we're exercising the CDK toolkit, and we're running up to 800 stacks at a time. So, and that's not necessarily an upper limit, that's kind of the memory limit of the code build instances that we're running on. So when I say 800 stacks, that can be across multiple regions and multiple accounts. And so what do our configuration files look like? So the configuration on the left-hand side here is our organization's configuration, and then on the right-hand side is our accounts configuration. So the big takeaway from this is that you'll see we've condensed the amount of toggle switches, if you will, that you need to go in and manage and understand and be able to go deploy out your landing zone. So in this case, what organizational units that you want to use, and then the organization's integrated features like service control policies, tagging policies, backup policies, those are all represented here in that configuration file. And I think I kind of glossed over it, but all of these configurations are part of the code base. So we are also providing, in addition to the engine, a AWS best practices approach to what a landing zone can look like if you wanted to use it. As well as our mandatory accounts here, you'll see that the account structure aligns very heavily with AWS Control Tower. So similar account structure, we have a management account, a log archive, and an audit account. And then based off of our security reference architecture, and as Mark was saying, the SCCA, or the Secure Cloud Computing Architecture, we know that you're going to also need maybe some shared services accounts or additional networking accounts that are there too. So that is all included in this initial set of configuration files that are on there, and ultimately when you execute it, you'll start seeing your landing zone get built. So you're going to start seeing the scaffolding of a multi-account strategy, of a well-architected foundation to be able to go in and host your workloads on it. So stepping a bit further into additional configurations, this is now kind of diving into our security services. So when we talk about the Landing Zone Accelerator, there's kind of multiple aspects to it. So there's the foundational account structure, there's the security services here, and then we'll get to the networking stack in a bit. But you'll see the common, the usual items that you're gonna find in a landing zone here: enabling Macie, enabling guard duty, enabling Security Hub, and the different controls that you want to use with it, the different frameworks, as well as defaulting your IAM password policies, and then also adding in all of the managed config rules to be able to go in and align towards different conformance packs or compliance standards that are out there. So in our initial baseline configuration, you're going to see all of the managed config rules that are also part of our NIST 853 conformance pack, and that will all get deployed to the accounts and regions that you specify. So what does this look like when you go execute this? You're going to see, additional security services. After you go build this on top of AWS Control Tower, you're going to see all of the services laid out in the accounts that you're going to expect them into. So most importantly, you're going to see centralized logging. You're going to see CloudWatch and CloudTrail and config all enabled within those accounts. So diving a little bit deeper into the networking, right? So we talked about security services. There's also a networking aspect to this. So For those who have done CloudFormation or maybe other infrastructure as code development, you'll know that when you go in and set up a networking architecture and you have to go set up your transit gateway, you want to build the attachments, specify the VPCs and the different accounts that you want to have them in, and then understand that order that you need to go build them in. So our approach takes all of that information inside this set of configuration files, and we handle the orchestration of those events and the orchestration of building out those resources in the respective accounts that you specify. So in this specific scenario, you're going to see transit gateway definition, and we're putting it inside the networking account. And you'll also see an example of a VPC as well. And in this specific VPC is a network endpoints VPC to be able to do centralized endpoint management, so you can put all your VPC endpoints in there. And it's automatically attached to the transit gateway. And you'll also see the gateway endpoints and interface endpoints. You're able to go specify those as a list of all the different services that you want to have in there, and then allow the orchestration engine, which is the accelerator, to be able to go in and deploy it. And ultimately, what you end up with is a picture similar to this one. So this is the full architecture diagram of our AWS best practices configuration currently sitting in our Git repository. Again, just as a reminder, it aligns with our control tower account layout as well as our security reference architecture. And then you're going to find the enablement of these services in these specific accounts that you would expect them to be in, as well as the delegated administrators, the AWS organizations integration for these services where it fits. So walking through just set of features. I know the slides get really busy, and we can put in all of these AWS services into that top level diagram, but just kind of walking through from a security perspective, we are handling KMS, identity and access management. You're able to go in and specify IAM users and groups, federated roles, and be able to have that deployed out to all your different accounts. And then, like we said, the enablement of the AWS security services like GuardDuty, Macie, and Security Hub. From a networking perspective, we, again, support the deployment of VPCs and the different services that are related to VPCs, transit gateways, route tables, security groups, NACLs, and we also support Route 53, so private hosted zones. And your hosted zones management can all be defined and deployed by the accelerator. And lastly, from an operations perspective, you can go specify budgets, set up your cost and usage reports, and have all of that be enabled by the accelerator. And yep. So, like I said, we highly recommend that you use the accelerator with Control Tower. So when you use it on top of Control Tower, it's a pretty layered approach that you'll see there. So you start with AWS Control Tower. That sets up your preventative and detective guardrails. You can go in and enable additional guardrails to be able to go match your compliance needs. And then that's where the Landing Zone Accelerator goes in and enables additional security services, additional networking on top of your original Control Tower layout. So kind of the mental model to think about it is, your foundations with Control Tower, the Landing Zone Accelerator for the orchestration of additional services and your foundational networking, and then your value add, right? The actual applications and workloads that we want to migrate and have working within your environment. So, and as Mark was saying, in regions where Control Tower is not yet there, we are building out the account layout to match that, the same landing zone that Control Tower starts with, to be able to allow for enrollment into a Control Tower environment. So when we start with those accounts, and Control Tower just released a new feature to be able to go in and define existing accounts, that's all done, again, in coordination, right? Because we want to be able to allow you to be able to take advantage of the managed services that are underneath. So we'll continue to add development to the accelerator. We'll add additional resources and guardrails there. And then we're going to work with the control services team or the control tower team to be able to go in and deprecate those features, right? Because we want to bring those into the managed services and have that be that continuous loop. So we do know that this solution does sit within your account, right? You elect to go enable this and have it run, but as AWS continues to make new features available and the managed services take on more features, we'll work to be able to go in and have those be deployed by that. And the way that we do that, again, is that distinction, right? We've separated the configuration from the code. So as Control Tower or other services take on that functionality, all we have to do is update the engine, but the intents that you made within your configuration file stay the same. So you can still maintain that same set of controls that you've already went through and decided what resources that you want to have there, and then allow the AWS engine underneath to be able to go take that over. So, cool. And kind of as a recap to the solution here, again, the whole point is to be able to go build that secure and compliant environment in days instead of months or even years, right? Some of us may still be building additional parts of our landing zone. That allows you to be able to go focus your time and your budget on the actual migration and transformation, right? Allowing you to actually innovate, actually focus on your workloads that you're bringing into AWS. Again, documentation is on its way to be able to go talk towards what we are implementing to be able to go in and help you with your accreditation, with your ATO process. And today you can go in and install the solution directly from GitHub, or you can have AWS Professional Services, work with our partners that are going to be helping deliver the solution to be able to have that running for you. The other major aspect of this solution is that we have worked with our AWS support team, so you can go into the console today if you have any issues or you want further explanation or technical assistance. You'll be able to see the Landing Zone Accelerator as an option in the support console. So kind of a call to action, that is our GitHub repository, that is the public page. You can go to that today and see all the hard work that the team has been doing and putting the code in there. This is all open source, as well as the AWS Solutions Implementation Guide. The implementation guide has obviously installation instructions, how to be able to go deploy it, and a similar architecture diagram to what I went over here, so you can see the architecture that you can deploy with our AWS best practices configuration. So I'll leave that up for a second because I see everyone taking some snapshots. Cool. And lastly, obviously, we have a huge library of training and skill builder tools. So be sure to go check those out, get some certifications. That's our certification site. There's practice examinations on there, so you can do some practice tests. And thank you. So I think we're going to open it up if there's any Q&A, but yeah. Cool. Some questions?
Yeah, sorry. Real quick question. So,
Sure.
So we've got our UK team has spent a decent amount of time putting in the AWS Secure Environment Accelerator for ISO-based control families, whereas domestically we've got a little bit more of hodgepodge IAC, some from ProServe, some internally for our own sort of governance scenarios. Can you sort of break down some of the differences between the two and give us some advice if, long run, it would be nice to have a central, global, if you will, group of IAC for different sort of compliance scenarios. What's the AWS perspective on those two is what I'm looking for.
Sure. You want to take that?
Sure. So you're asking about the Secure Environment Accelerator. There are several, as I mentioned, frameworks that exist across all of AWS, came out of our partners, they're in GitHub. This is I call the engine of creation inside of AWS. We have a lot of super bright people who love to build, and we see innovation come out of various geographies, various industries. And what we don't want to do, and this is why we work very closely and in conjunction with the Control Tower team, AWS's definitive answer to a landing zone is Control Tower and the ecosystem around Control Tower. So you should always keep that very squarely in mind. But as with the maturity of all technology platforms, it takes a while to get there. There are reasons why you can and cannot move at a certain pace. So certain teams move way out in front of that, and they want to fill the gap between what the services can do right now and what the customer needs or what a given ecosystem needs. That particular code base we know very well. My team is actually responsible for its maintenance and its updating. We have been tasked with organizing all of these frameworks that are coming out of solutions architecture in AWS and other components of professional services and condensing them down into one global framework that works in very tight conjunction with the service teams. So I, as a manager of this team, have a mandate of organizing it. One of the benefits you get out of it, and one of the things we've been discussing and probably didn't state completely openly, because we've separated out the configuration from the code, what you get out of this, the ASIA, there's another one in Japan called the BLIA. There are several of these. You can go looking for them in GitHub. There's no reason to cover this up. The value in these is the pattern that gets expressed out of them. So that pattern is literally just a configuration file in our engine. You can build whatever pattern you want, because all the controls are roughly the same. The implementation of those controls, their naming schema, the taxonomy and the nomenclature that describes the underlying risk management framework or that compliance is just an overlay to the same technical controls. So we're going to have a HIPAA. We're going to have a PBMM, that would be protected mode B, medium in Canada. NIST 853 Rev 4, NIST 853 Rev 5. We are working with multiple teams internally. In fact, someone who's sitting 2 rows in front of you, we are also working with this team to identify which configurations and compliance frameworks we are expressing to you. It comes in 2 forms, the technical controls and the sort of pattern of their implementation inside that engine, but also the documentation that goes along with it. Because I can build this stuff for you all day long. We can all build it for you all day long, but you're still going to have the challenge of walking through the ATO process. And there are some other partners that we work very closely with in the audience who have efforts, and we are working with them in speeding up that ATO process. But that's the goal. Like, I've done this so many times in my career at AWS and before I got here, building out this stuff again and again and again. We really need to move beyond the foundational building so that it is almost a thought-free process. And this is where the Control Tower team is focusing very, very tightly, and they're incredibly visionary in where they're taking the service, and you'll see a lot of changes. In fact, if you go back over the release for the last 2 weeks, they put out 2 pretty large updates to the service, which is an indicator of how rapidly they're innovating. But all of those other frameworks will eventually come into this framework and be represented. In fact, for several of the more popular ones, by about September of this year, we will be publishing all the crosswalks with those controls families, and we will have upgrade kits as well to assist customers and partners to elevate or lift their environment from the previous generation of that framework into the new landing zone accelerator. That's why it has that name, because it's intentionally generic to describe the fact that it is one framework that covers all of them. Cool. Any other questions?
Just to confirm, that is available in GovCloud now, then?
It is in GovCloud. It works in every AWS region, every commercial region, every GovCloud region, as well as US secret and top secret.
Yeah, I got a quick question. This is for Randy. You mentioned this during the talk that it's had some like basis in like the DoD compliant framework. How similar is like the actual back-end logic and some of the actual orchestration that you built into it? How similar is it to that?
Yeah, so Ultimately, the architecture of being able to use code pipeline and being able to go in and handle the stages and the different steps that need to happen and be able to deploy, again, I use networking as an example because there's a very clear order of operations that you need to go through. All of that engine is part of the new solution. Where this is different from Compliant Framework is this is a 100% CDK-based solution. So we use kind of a hybrid approach with Compliant Framework, kind of half CDK, half CloudFormation, but in this case, it's 100% CDK and full separation of the configuration file from it. The takeaway, though, is that ultimately what you get, right, if you think of Compliant Framework as an engine to be able to go deploy an environment, what you get from a multi-account structure, the managed controls that are laid out in there, the very prescriptive approach to the way that we do networking in alignment with the SCCA, that's all possible and very closely to what we're providing with the best practices.
Makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
So you guys kind of answered my other question, but just to clarify,
Yeah.
this IAC that they've been talking about that already has like the ATO approval for 3 years and the NIST controls, you're saying this is going to get rolled up into your cloud accelerator solution in the future? That's the plan?
That's a slightly more complicated question. So the IACC that DoD, DISA, I believe it's the HAC, the Hosting and Compute Center, is responsible for the infrastructure as code package that is used. That's actually based on the Compliant Framework that I discussed earlier. And initially it was very heavily reliant upon it, and now it's probably 80% because they built additional capabilities into it. We work with that team and have been working with that team for some time. We are talking to them about iterating through and updating the process. So you need to think of it in these terms, right? The reason why this works, the landing zone accelerator works, is because the end result of all these different landing zones and landing zone frameworks is that, you know, you could think of them in a variety of ways, but the reality is they're not wildly different. They're roughly the same. The end result is the same. The difference is the engine that generates the configurations, the engine that generates those technical implementations. So the end result of that infrastructure as code is exactly the same end result you would get out of the landing zone accelerator. It's just that that code base and that form of implementation is currently ATO'd, and that is a fast path for the DoD customer to use these things. That being said, we also have some defense industrial customers who are testing out and using the landing zone accelerator on AWS. Benefit out of that is it gives them very fast experimental environments with very high levels of security. But if they're building for the end customer, the answer today, absolutely. Use the HAC IAC, use the infrastructure as code package that we talked about. But I expect in 6 to 12 months, we'll have a slightly different conversation around it.
Okay, yeah, because the thought process is we need an environment that has ATO approval so that all we need
Absolutely.
is application ATO approval and we can roll instead of, okay.
By all
So,
means.
but you think in the future you will have ATO for accelerator?
Oh, most definitely.
Okay, cool.
Most definitely.
So it's basically, the difference is you built yours with CDK, you have config files that we can pass it and give it different parameters. Theirs is like the hybrid CloudFormation CDK that they ripped from the former Compliant Framework. That's
Yeah, I mean, the reality is, you know, ATOs can take a long time. When that one started, the only game in town was the Compliant Framework.
Okay.
And now there is a new technology base, but that DNA is in here.
awesome, I
the same
appreciate
thing.
it, and it's great
Yeah.
work, guys, it's outstanding.
Thank you. Yes.
Question up front.
Is the idea that we would apply this landing zone to new organizations or your existing org and new OUs within? You know, is it new accounts only, existing accounts? What's the rollout plan for existing customers?
Yeah, good question. So as with all, you know, multi-account strategies, when we're talking landing zones, it obviously is much easier in a new environment, right? And bring it, build that up. However, what you're going to see inside our configurations are all the toggle switches to slowly, you know, enroll a lot of those services, because you're going to have to make decisions about, I was using one previous engine to be able to go set up, or maybe I had configured it manually. So in my brownfield environment, you can slow roll adding in that functionality from the accelerator. So to answer your question directly, the intent is to be able to use it for both. So obviously for brand new net environments, it will lay out all of that architecture, but you can go in and toggle it all the way down and start introducing piecemeal to be able to go support integration into your current environment.
Can you guys contrast the accelerator solution that you presented with the current CIS benchmark tool that's in Security Hub today? I mean, when I go there and I can see what's, valid, what's not in compliance. I mean, seems like this is going in that path, but it seems like you've taken it to a different level or a different step. And can you also relate that to specifically NIST 853 security control implementations and
Sure.
within Accelerator?
Sure, yeah. So the landing zone accelerator is intended to go enable a lot of those other security services, of which one is Security Hub. So Security Hub is specific to being able to go in and have those frameworks, the CIS one that you mentioned, and then having all those controls that are there. So you would use both in concert with each other. You would use the accelerator to go in and define all of the frameworks that you might want to use. You want to use a PCI, or want to use the AWS one in there, and then decide which ones you want to have toggled. You can have the accelerator go enable that for you, and it will enable that across all the regions you have enabled for, set up the Security Hub, finding aggregation, so you can still go back to your console and see all that information. From a NIST 853 perspective, we've taken a look. If you guys go through our conformance packs, they're very much aligned to different compliance frameworks, one of which is NIST 853. So we've taken many of the rules that are defined in there that have already been crosswalked against controls and have those in our AWS best practices configuration. So you can go in and start with that and know that it has many of the managed rules that are deployed. Yeah. Cool.
Anyone else?
All right.
How do we convince the ISSOs that this is already doing the job, meaning it's already making you compliant, or do we still have to produce the documentation to, to prove that we are compliant to the ISSOs?
Well, excellent question, because that's sort of the name of the game for all of this, right? You look at the pantheon of customers that AWS works with, huge. It's almost unfathomable, and I've been here for 5 years and I'm still wrapping my head around it. When you're dealing with public sector customers in particular, but also healthcare customers, those that work in highly regulated and highly compliant environments, the name of the game at the end of the day is you can build anything, but you can't do anything with it until it's accredited, until it's ATO'd. So one of those mechanisms to scale is standardization, but the other is providing proof in advance. So one of the things that we learned in working with the compliant framework and some of the other frameworks that were mentioned is we have been asked to do a lot of work over time in professional services. Our partners are asked to do this type of work where help us get an ATO, help us walk through the accreditation. That can be the path of tears for some organizations because it takes a very long time, and it's a human process. It's a people and process problem. It's not really a technology problem. You can prove it. You can test a control, and this is why you have the evolution from paper-driven compliance to continuous compliance, where you have dashboards that represent these things. In fact, I saw in the audience here earlier Telos and some other members of some of our partners and who have built packages to show dashboards of compliance in real time, to say this is on and this is off. But it can take a while to build that. So the paper accreditation is one of the things that we are working very rapidly on. So in a matter of months, like in this summer, you will see we will provide packages of accreditation against NIST 853. HIPAA is coming pretty fast. You may actually see that first. I have to sync with that team right now. But there are multiple teams internally at AWS who are all working around this framework and this approach so that we have standardized, fully documented controls so that you, either as a customer or perhaps you're a partner or working with a partner, that you have a fast path to that ATO. And even right now, because these controls are standardized and we have the mechanisms of implementation and you can actually align them, you can look at config and others that will show you what's being flipped on and what's not. You can already get a fast path to accreditation because you have an easy way to document the implementation of those controls, and you can point right back to the code base. The goal at the end of the day for all of this, and I'm a huge proponent of it, I've been doing it for a long time. I talked to many customers about it. My first instinct when you said to prove it, I wanted to say, just invite me to the phone call and I'll jump on with you and help you. But the idea here is to scale, remove the humans from the process. We provide the code, we provide the controls, we provide the attestation for those controls, so you get the full package. Anyone else?
Great.
And I want to add to that point, I've seen a lot of the roadmaps for our services this year. I will just say for this audience in particular, you're going to benefit tremendously from a lot of the innovation that's coming out of many of those services. Working in orchestration, not just individually, but to help you get to this sort of continuous ATO natively on the platform. And that's a big deal. That's a big deal. Anyone?
All right. Great.
Okay, thank you very much. Pleasure.